All right, well, I am so excited to be with the 55th Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. That's a good number, 55.
I like it.
You should be. Yeah. Well, and now that you're
it
here.
It almost took me that many rounds, but yeah.
I was actually watching all of those rounds from Hawaii. I was on some active duty orders at the time, and luckily it was early in the night for me, so I got to stay up and cheer. No, yeah. I cheered. I was at Taco Bell, actually. I remember cheering you over some nachos and cheese. So anyway, on to more serious stuff related to China, AI, space. There's so much going on in the world. I want to start with space because you authored the Space Act in 2015. I know there's a lot of space entities in your district. What I think that people are watching this may not know, we think about a war, God forbid, with China. We think about a war over Taiwan, what would happen to our Navy. What people may not realize is the next war may be the first war to be fought in space. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you're preparing our military.
Well, I focused on the Space Act before because you wanted growth in space, and you didn't want it all government-based, right? Commercially, we have really shot up, and it was a concern to me years ago, speaking with Elon. You would have to go to Russia to get a rocket, or you have to pay Russia to send it up. Now today, the whole new world, with SpaceX created and a number of different companies, American-based, American-created, we can now go to space different, we can send the satellites. What's really concerning to me is when it comes to China. China watched how we fought war in Desert Storm. They watched that we used GPS, and you know, China's not in the International Space Station, they have their own space station. China has a rover on Mars. China has landed on the moon, and China has landed on the backside of the moon, the dark side. America has not. And so they emphasize space, which gives them an ability from satellites to take out satellites. They're doing hypersonics. So we need not only to stay ahead, but innovation-wise, we need to grow. And the old mindset that you put 4 satellites up to monitor what's coming up from weapons and others, what if they knock one of them out? You're delayed. So now it's more of a multiple. And can we build smaller satellites, have a multiple of satellites? I mean, think about what's happening in Ukraine today. It's not America providing the internet, it's Elon.
Yeah.
And so it's a different way of thinking and utilizing private sector along with government, I think, enhances synergy for America and to think differently along these lines.
So do we need to do more investment in space? Is that something that you're, I mean, there's a lot of, you had to fight the budget fight and earlier this year.
But you know what, it doesn't, what's unique here is government can invest a little money along with the private sector that can go a long way. SpaceX got a small contract early on, which made it be able to sustain itself. And they took all the risk. And look how they transformed. They're saving money instead of using a rocket one time like government, and then it's done. They treat it like an airplane. They can use it multiple times. They can send people up now. They can go to the station. It's a different look, a different way. And that's a small investment with the private sector that utilizes more of their own capital too. And commercially, they're lifting the satellites up more so than the other countries as well. So it's the combination. It doesn't have to be all government, but we should have laws that allow the incentive for private sector, right? I provide the ability, if you want to go up and mine a meteor, you can do that, right? But also give the protection that as they're testing, if something goes wrong, they're not going to get sued. And you know, when government tries something and it fails, they stop the whole program for years. You got to get back up, and there's risks involved. So you want to eliminate those risks, but allow people to still be able to take them to go forward.
You know, in the Trump administration, when I was working for Mike Pompeo, we had to cover the whole world. And every day, though, there was something related to China or Iran that was on our file for the day. You just brought up China. The one thing that I am hearing from so many of the China hawks and people that are concerned about Xi Jinping's intentions is the fact that we still have U.S. venture capital, U.S. companies investing in Chinese AI or in Chinese companies that are actually helping or beholden to the PLA, to the People's Liberation Army. The Senate is considering measures on this. I know the House is as well. Should we just flat out ban this type of investment from American companies?
I think we seriously need to look at it, and you got to look at it at different layers as well. You know, one of the things I'm very proud of when we took the majority was creating the Select Committee on China. So we're looking at every element about this, and it's very bipartisan. I'd gone early on to Hakeem, take him down to the skiff, to lay out a number of things that are happening, that China has been systematically going after different industries in America, and a lot of it is in technology, and they're enhancing themselves by using American technology in a way. And so what I wanted to be able to do is speak with one voice. From your last job, I couldn't thank you enough, looking at Huawei and what they have been able to do technology-wise, and you got the CCP subsidizing it to get into other countries, but they're collecting data on other people, they're utilizing it. This is something very serious that we all need to look at, and I think making sure that American technology stays with our allies will keep us ahead of everybody else.
You know what, I think we spend so much time educating the American people about the threat from the Chinese Communist Party, about the possibility, God forbid, of having to go to war with them. We spend so much time educating on them, but if you talk to the average American and you say, should American companies be able to do business with the American Department of Defense and the PLA, I think most Americans would say, well, no, you shouldn't be aiding our enemy. Isn't it pretty simple?
Yeah, it is, and what's concerning to me too is you have some American companies that don't want to do business with the American government military. But then you hear him talking about doing business with China. If you want to do business in China, you're doing business with the CCP. And that's a real concern to me, the control they have. And we look at where technology allows the advancements for individuals, but also to protect us from going to war. And so I always look for America and American companies to focus on ways they can help all of us.
So as somebody who works a lot on the China issue, on the China file for a long time, I feel a whiplash in the last 6 to 8 weeks from this administration on their China policy. And I'm curious if they have testified before you guys or briefed all of you privately, because they were somewhat trying to continue some of the Trump-era policies on China, keeping some of the sanctions and trade restrictions, at least some tougher rhetoric, more than we expected. But about 6 weeks ago, we had Biden officials that went on the anniversary of Tiananmen Square to China for meetings. I guess they forgot to Google that date. Then you have Blinken inviting himself, badgering his way into China. Then you have Yellen literally bowing and kowtowing to the Chinese. And finally, John Kerry there for the past 4 days came out with nothing except an agreement for more talks. I say all that to say, Mr. Speaker, I think that the Biden administration has fundamentally changed in the last 6 to 8 weeks their approach to China, from being more hawkish towards China to this engagement strategy that has not shown any results. But it's a fundamental shift from my viewpoint on their China policy. Have they briefed you on this? Have they explained this shift?
Not at all, but I agree with you, but they didn't shift. This is where they've always truly have been. I mean, look what they did when they first came in. They got nothing from Iran, but they provided more. They've shown weakness when it comes. You watch their decisions in Afghanistan. You watch every decision almost in a foreign policy, which Secretary Gates has said about Biden has been wrong, and if it's right, it's too late, so it becomes wrong. The weakness he has shown against China, and there's one thing, it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. It doesn't matter if you like President Trump or disliked him. The one thing he was 100% right on was about China, and he woke America up to that. He woke the world up to it. But for them to reverse course, to be there on Tiananmen Square, the Chinese knew that, right? You have a balloon flying over, and somehow we're at fault for that? It's concerning to me, the weakness.
The spy base in Cuba.
Oh yeah, and then they try to spin us somewhere else. China has continually watched us, and they're doing every action to put themselves in a stronger position. There's a lot of ways to look long term. You never want to go to war. You could take the Graham Allison's approach. But the one thing we should look around the world, which is very concerning to me, is not just China, but it's the building of China creating an axis of power with North Korea, with Russia, with Iran. All countries that want to expand their sphere of influence, and all places that Biden has been weak. He went to see Putin lift the sanctions off Nord Stream 2. It looked like Neville Chamberlain, so he invades Ukraine. With Iran, he opens them back up, gets nothing in return. Kerry going to China, all she said was, don't tell me about the environment, we'll decide on our own, and they get an advantage over the rest of us, where they curtail the economic growth of America. This is a real concern to me, because each action has been weakness and shown a strength for China to be able to create the axis of power against republics and democracies, which is wrong.
Yeah, it is the appeasement policy for autocrats that they think, and by the way, it's the same approach I think that they've taken with Putin, which every time is, well, we don't want to do X because it might cause Putin to escalate. And it's the same approach with Xi Jinping. I got to ask you about this because this interview is on Twitter, and so people care about social media. There was a very big push earlier this year from some people in your caucus to ban TikTok. That seems to have died down. Is that still an issue, or is that?
I think it's an issue, but I think people look at it as well. How can you protect the data, that information people are getting, and others? And I think that's a real concern people have about China as well. And I think people are looking at other avenues. How can you protect that? Is there a way to take that away from them, store it within here? We had a pretty good hearing, I thought, about this in Energy and Commerce. But yeah, we've got a lot of challenges out there, but it's something people are still looking at.
Early in your speakership, you met with President Tsai from Taiwan, she's fantastic. I met her a few years ago.
At the Reagan Library.
What a better place to be. Very symbolic. And you've been outspoken on Taiwan for a long time. This caught my eye yesterday. At the Aspen Security Forum, the Chinese ambassador was there, and he was speaking. Reportedly, the Taiwanese vice president, as you know, is supposed to be in the U.S. in a few weeks. And the Chinese ambassador was quoted as saying that it is a top priority for him to stop the Taiwanese vice president from visiting the U.S. in a few weeks. And he said, this is like a gray rhino charging at us. What's your take on the ambassador's comments?
Their language and their rhetoric has got to stop. They have a right to come, but this also shows much more from American businesses and others, that the weakness and appeasement of this Biden administration has made China more bolden to try to dictate to us who we can see and who we can meet with. That is wrong. That can never be the case. And that's why we need this administration to even be stronger when it comes up. The interesting thing, when the president came and met with me, and not just me, I had a bipartisan group there. We met at the Reagan Library because I think the symbolism there is the defeat of communism, right? But in that meeting, I had Republicans and Democrats alike. We're very united on this issue, and we should learn from what's happened around the world now. You need to prepare so that doesn't happen, right? So Taiwan needs certain type of weapons. They need to be able to, they're an island, to have their own energy form. These are the things you should make happen so a war never takes place. That's what lessons we should learn from Ukraine. I remember meeting with then Vice President Biden, having coming back from Ukraine, asking him to sell javelins to Ukraine, just a defensive weapon to stop tanks. He said no, that he thought Merkel, and you know what? It could incite Putin to invade. No, not having them prepared made Putin invade. That same philosophy should be looked at when it comes to Taiwan. If this Biden administration kowtows to a Chinese ambassador telling us who can and cannot come to America, that's a big sign of weakness.
Absolutely. Well, last question, because I know that you are very busy being the Speaker of the House and all. I wanted to ask you about semiconductors and chips, and obviously getting ourselves off of our foreign dependency there. You had the CHIPS Act that passed earlier this year. But I think it's not just about semiconductors and chips. I think the bigger general question is, you and I have spent so much of our interview talking about how we stop investment into China, into the PLA or into AI, or how we stop TikTok. Shouldn't we have a mind shift in the United States to where we are on the cutting edge of these technologies and the Chinese are spending their time saying, well, how do we stop the Americans?
You should actually reverse. Instead of the investment into American technology. And you want to think about this, right? China controls 90% of critical minerals, but they control 95% of the processing of critical minerals. So what does that mean? We need to open up more mines in America. We need to invest in the ability to processing them. Medical supplies. When it comes to our food, we're watching them buy our farmland up, right? We're watching them buy into our meat packing facilities. We're watching them invest in our infrastructure. You can't sit here blindly when you get comments of what they're saying now. It's nothing negative against the Chinese people. We're talking about the Communist Party here. We should be investing in America, that we're not dependent upon anybody else. If we should learn anything from Europe, dependency makes you weak.
Amen and hallelujah.
Yes.
Last thing, actually. What book should I be reading right now?
You know, what I would say, if you haven't yet read Angela Duckworth, Grit.
I have not.
You need to. She's a professor at Penn. She studies what makes people successful. Her first study, she went to the military academy, and it's not your intellect. You know what it is? Perseverance. Do you have the grit that you don't give up?
Well, you certainly have the grit, and that's why you're the 55th Speaker of the House. Thank you so much.
Thank you.